joining. All right, hello and welcome to the third session of Foo-Bar, the Java review sessions. My name is Zen Rizvi. I'll be your host for this evening. And I guess we're still waiting for a few more minutes for more people to join. You are already in chat. Feel free to say hello so I know that how many people are here. That'll make my work a lot easier. But we'll give people a few more minutes to show up, and then we will get going. Just a heads up, the session for today is JavaFX and other graphical user interface related content. And we have Dogefish, big fan. Welcome to the session. And thank you, I appreciate you being here. And we have Indolency. Welcome. Hello. Thank you for coming. All right, I'll minimize this back here. All right, so why don't we jump in? It looks like we already have a few people here, and then hopefully more people will show up as we go along. Keep in mind, this might be a session that's a bit longer than the last one. I think the last one was about 50 minutes. This might be a bit longer just because we are doing a lot more today. And we have SM Guns for the win. Welcome. Hello to you too. All right, so just to jump in, we'll go over a few disclaimers that I have to go out at the beginning of every session, and then we'll cover these topics, GUIs and JavaFX and MVC. This essentially is a fancier way of saying how do we separate your logic code with your GUI code. I know for a lot of our projects, this is really important to have a good design, so I thought this would be something that we should cover as well. We also have pawning files. Welcome. All right, so just again, a few of the disclaimers. Once again, this is my personal channel. This is not part of my TA duties as a University of Calgary graduate student. I am a TA for Computer Science 233, as most of you may already know. I just do this because, some students made a request for special sessions like this. I enjoy doing sessions like these, and so, it was a good match. I have the instructor's permission to do this, so I think we're all good here. Once again, we will be focusing on Java and object-oriented concepts review from around Computer Science 233 and 219 at the University of Calgary. These are introductory object-oriented programming courses. But this session is actually open to everyone. And then today we will be talking about JavaFX. Once again, feel free to ask questions and have discussions in chat. When most of the times we teach, you have the audience in front of you, you have the students in front of you, and you can see the expression on their face to see how you're actually doing. If people are finding the stuff interesting, if anyone is completely lost, if it's completely boring. But in a session like this, I don't really get to see the audience, so the chat is really helpful for me in order to specify, or in order to learn how things are going. And if people have any questions, then I can use the chat, and I encourage you to use the chat to actually ask questions, answer other people's questions, let me know how things are going, and if I'm moving too slow or too fast, and so on. Few simple chat rules, common courtesy, keep things clean. There's please no spamming, and last but not least, once the session is over, I will post it on my YouTube channel later tonight or earlier tomorrow morning. And then just to clarify, we have people here from the University of Calgary, either of these two courses, 219 and 233. And I realized I just forgot to do a sound check and a screen and the video check. But based on the responses, it looks like that we are all up and ready to go. Okay, so jumping into the topics today that we're covering, we have graphical user interfaces, using JavaFX, and model view control design pattern. Just to give a heads up, so I did do quite a bit of practice over the weekend to get a setup going. I will be coding from scratch here just so that you can see, me actually setting up the project and getting things done. And if there are mistakes to be made, it's a great way to learn from other people's mistakes. But just so that we don't go for a very long time, I do have a backup project on my separate laptop here. If I need to look stuff up, I can do so right here. And I will be doing that quite a bit because I haven't memorized a lot of the code that I need. So let's get started. So we'll start off with, once again, creating a new project. Let's just call this session 3. This is a new class. There we go, mistake number 1. Project instead. And now, since we will be separating the code for the graphical interface and the logic and the handlers, we'll start by creating 2 different packages right here. So the one we will call logic, or this could also be called model. Then we have the view or GUI, and then last but not least, we have the handlers. Okay, and then there's one thing that I like to have just to start off, and that's called drivers. This is where my where the classes would be that would have the main method. So essentially, depending on how you actually work your project, I normally just like to have a single class with the main method. So there's going to be a single driver, but that's going to have its package of its own. If you really want to, you can put it in the logic as well. But I like to have things separate. So in order to get things started, let's see if I can pull some of my code up from here, so that we can actually get things going. And where did that go? Here we go. We'll start off by creating our driver class, and let's just call this essentially, let's just call this session 3, because this is what that is. All right, and we would need a main method. All right, now since we are using JavaFX, I need to actually, this actually extends application. Yes, this one does. And luckily for when you're using Eclipse, we can just import things easily. Normally this works. What have I not done yet? I think I may actually need to import the JavaFX library. CPSC23 JavaFX. All right, how about now? Comment before we get started. How does one donate to this fine content? There is no donations. This is just free for anyone. I can actually get in trouble if people start giving money for this. That's against the university regulations. If you do want to donate, donate to your favorite charity. That's all I ask. Thank you. We're already having our first issue, which is not loading JavaFX. There we go. I actually just needed to import the library. So we have here, and then normally the main method is just something like this, straightforward. And we need to actually import the session or the method start. This would be get a scene as an argument. All right. And we can do is a scene as an argument. It's not a scene. It's usually a stage. As I mentioned, I have not memorized this. I'm doing this off memory and just looking at some of the code that I worked with earlier over the weekend. Okay, and then what we're going to need, well, first of all, keep importing. That's Control-Shift-O, and then you can set the name. Let's see, stage dots. That's the set title method, and we can give it a name. Let's call it session 3, and stage.show. And if we did this right, we should just get a blank window with session 3 at the top, because that's our title. Okay, so we have something very, very basic up and running. That's straightforward. Now, I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to start with my first screen. So the plan is, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier. The plan is that we will have at least 2 screens, meaning, or rather, I think I can draw this better. Let's see. Create a new slide. Insert shapes. So we'll have our first screen. It won't be orange, it'll just be a basic screen, and then it's going to have 2 buttons. The first one will be a start button, and then a second one is going to be a quit button. Something like that, but hopefully it'll be better aligned than this. Again, this is just rough drawing. If we were in person, I'd be drawing this on board or on a piece of paper. If you click quit, it's going to just quit the application nicely without crashing. If you click start, it's going to jump onto the next screen, which is going to be, again, something like this. I'm going to divide this into 4 different sections. So let's see, again, shapes. I'm going to divide this into a vertical and a horizontal division. Once again, here, in this quadrant here, we would have something like a dot, I'd say, and then we would be able to move it around using our keyboard. Over here, I'm going to copy this here. In the second quadrant, we would have 4 buttons. I think I should have done this earlier, but like I said, we do this on the go. 4 aligned buttons, and then they would be like up, down, left, right. Left, right, and depending on which button you click, it's going to move this this key, or rather the circle, based on the direction you press. Down here, we will have something just that's being animated. I think maybe we'll put in a line which goes, which travels across the screen. And then here we would have some kind of animation going. Let's say a button. I'm gonna copy another button down here, which is going to have its value, or rather the label text being updated from 0 to 1,000. And this is just going to keep going in animation form. So this would give us hopefully a wide enough coverage to cover very many different projects. As we have buttons, we have animation going here, we have key listeners, we have button listeners, we have button values being changed. And then by the time we're done this, if we have more requests, then we'll try to see what else we can do. But hopefully this is clear for now. If you have any questions, let me know in chat. I know there's a delay between me speaking and what you see. So I always like to wait a few seconds before moving on to the next step, which is actually starting by coding off this part of the screen. So we will actually be creating a scene which has the screen with the 2 buttons. All right, nothing yet. So let's do this. Okay, we would have a scene. Now, in order for us to create scenes, as we already discussed, we'll be creating more than one. So we're going to have something common between them. And I'm going to call this my base scene. This is going to be a parent class, and then going to have a scene on it in itself. Now the scene class is imported by JavaFX, as you can see right up there, and it's going to have an access to the session 3 class. This is where the actual thing is being displayed. By that I mean this particular stage. All right, so let's start off, and then again we're going to need basic constructors, or base scene. Or rather, this dot session, and then we would need setters and getters. So luckily with Eclipse, you can simply do this. Let's see, what else do we need? We need a going to need a setup method. This is where we actually write the code to set up the screen. Now, since this method is abstract, we're going to need to make this class abstract as well. And hopefully that gets rid of our error, which it does, luckily. So I think documentation here is going to be really helpful. So let's do that as well. Scene where we are drawing. The access to the driver. We have, well, you think, why am I switching a primitive IDE? Which IDE are you using? I'm just using Eclipse because that's what I got used to when I was during my undergrad, and it works good enough for me. And then we have getters and setters. This is going to be a basic method. So this is where we the part of the region of the documentation is that I may be assuming some things which I'm not saying explicitly, so that you know, when I'm writing it, you can also see it. And also, if someone else is viewing this at a later date and they're just skipping through the actual discussion, they're just looking at the code, they actually have access. They can actually understand what's going on down here. So we have Notepad++, Atom. Those are good tools to get started. Notepad++, actually I got started with Notepad, just basic Notepad, and eventually moved to Notepad++ and then Eclipse. So you know, it's like when you're trying to learning to drive a car. At first you try to do everything safely and correctly, and then you start depending on certain shortcuts. But I do not condone driving recklessly. Safe driving. All right, where were we? Okay, so we have done our base scene, at least for now. And then we can try to see, we can create our first screen. I'm gonna call this first scene. And this is going to extend our base scene. Import the required methods. Then important things properly. Okay, and now we actually have the setup scene right here. We're going to have a button, the start button, as we said, new, with the text that says start. And then we're going to have a button for quit. Import the button class from JavaFX as well. And now we actually need handlers. Now I know a lot of people, or actually we'll come to handlers next. Let's just, you know, get them on the screen and get things going. Since we want them side by side, we're going to use the H box, which is a horizontal box. And then now we add the two buttons to it. Okay, then let's see. Use a stack pane just so that we know that they would be centered. where am I? Children, add. I'm going to add my box here. Okay. And what I want to do is set the scene. New scene is going to be our pane. And let's see, how big do we want our screen to be? 600 by 500. Import properly. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any issues right here. There's no errors, which is good. Now we want to connect our session 3 class to our first scene, because this is the scene we want to show up as soon as our the program launches. So we go back to our session 3 after we've actually set up the show. We're going to set up the first scene. Again, import scene dot set up. Well, let's see if we've done this right. We should have the 2 buttons showing up, and at this point we don't. So let's see what we are missing. Here. Yes, being able to get comfortable with IDEs does save a lot of time in the long term. What is the package driver? So this is where my class is going to be with the main method. Essentially, you know, again, going with the car analogy, there's a person who's actually driving the car. So this is the code or the class which is driving the actual project. This is where things get started, hence the package drivers. Okay. I think what we're missing here is we actually need to update the stage as well every time we set up the new scene. So then when we're here, we have set the scene. Let's see, the first scene, we will actually have the method for display. Did I create my display method here? I did not. We get from, oh, there we go. It should be okay. Let's see, I'm missing a few things here. Let's see. Session 3 class, we have the set stage method, which shouldn't be a stage. It would be a set scene method. The argument is of type scene, not stage. And then the stage dot set scene, and that would be the input scene. Now in our base class, instead of set stage, we have a set scene method. And then in our first scene, at the end of doing everything, we should call the display method. Now we have, see, we're having a null pointer exception somewhere. Application start method, time exception. Trying to find out where this is coming from. Oh, there we go. 12 stage. Oh, because we haven't satisfied the stage yet. There we go. And luckily, no errors. And then we can see the start and quit buttons right here. They don't do anything yet because we haven't done the handlers, but at least they're up there. And then another thing we want to do is, make them come in the center. So let's do, let's have them come to the center first. This is where we were. And now we can actually work with the alignments here. And then that would be box.setAlignment across that center, and then now we can see that the buttons are in the center. So now again, documentation. And then the last thing we do is set the scene. There we go. So we have the first screen working. We do need handlers to actually do the proper actions that we need to do. And this would be the button. So let's try the quit handler. This is the handler that's going to help us quit the program. And once again, it's going to need access to our session 3 class. Import the correct classes, and we're going to write the handle button, or the handle method rather. To which I actually forgot, because you're supposed to implement event handler. This is going to be an action event. Import once again JavaFX. All right, and let's see. Oh, I have the wrong class here. This is going to just be platform.exit. So I guess we didn't actually need access to this particular constructor. So we can just delete all that. Update the import statement. And now when we actually create our first scene, we want to attach the event handlers. Now we're going to create an instance of button quit handler, queue handler, and that would be imports. Okay. Now we have a question from Lala CPSC. Should you always write event handlers in separate classes? A lot of times that comes down to personal preference and the design of the code that you're writing. I like to keep things object oriented, so I like to separate out the handlers into different classes. I also wanted to give an example on how you could do that, but depends on how big your handlers are. This one is literally one, like it has one line of code, so this one I could embed it as a nested class. But if it is something longer, if it has more than one method, or if the method that it has does quite a few things, then I would recommend putting it in a different class. But if it's something as small as this, you can easily keep it as a nested class. But one of the things I saw was people having nested classes for their handlers, but then those particular methods became significantly long. Like I'm talking 500 or 600 lines of code, which is something you would want to avoid. Thank you for that question, by the way. It's a great question. So anyway, so if we go back, we have our two buttons here. If you press quit, it should exit without crashing, which it does so, luckily. Nothing's gone wrong yet. Now, so we just want to specify this one quits on when it's clicked, and this one launches the second scene. If I can spell launches correctly. There we go. And now we're going to need another GUI class, and this would be our second scene. This will also extend from our base scene. Extends. Add the unimplemented methods. Now we add the constructor. All right, now let's go back to where our second scene was, kind of right here. Just to go back this window here, so this is what we wanted. We wanted a screen with 4 different sections. The first section is going to have a small object like a circle that we're going to move around based on our keyboard input. The second section is going to have 4 buttons, and based on the button we press, it's going to move the circle again. The third section is going to, I think we said we're going to have some kind of line which is going to be animated. And then the fourth section here is going to be a button with a label that's going to be changing repeatedly, or continuously rather. Let's start off with the first section right here, or rather at least the back end of the screen, which is the second scene that we call. All right, and now in order to do this, so in order to come up with a tiled screen like this, we will be using a tile pane. And then this would be our root. And we're going to give it a vertical orientation. So now what I'm trying to do here with this is, let's go back and create a so I'm going to create a pane which is going to have which is going to be the back end of this screen. It's going to have two rows. The first row is going to be these 2 panels, and then the second row is going to be here. And now I'm going to create a nested tile pane which is going to separate this row into 2 columns, hence giving me and then a third tile pane which is going to separate this row into 2 columns. Hence, this will give me the 4 blocks that I need. Okay, so we have that, and then dot preferred number of rows is going to be 2, just so that we can have in mind. Now, this is going to be our first row. And once again, recall that it's going to be horizontal because this is going to give us our first row, which is 2 columns. And then what we need to do is set pref columns is going to, so we're going to have 2 columns here. And we can actually give it the height. Height is going to be half of whatever our screen is. And then you saw initially our screen was, where did we set that up? In first session, I think. It's going to be 500, I believe. So 250. And then we'll come back and fix the hard-coded numbers after we've set up this scene. Okay, so we have that, and then the width is going to be the whole width of the screen, because we're not dividing that in two, we're only dividing the height in two. And this is going to be 600 right here. Okay. Now, instead of actually writing the scenes in here, I'm actually going to create 4 different methods with each which sets up its own scene. So I'm going to do, let's see, yeah, first row children dot add scene A. Now this is giving me red lines because those methods don't exist yet. And I'm going to follow something similar for my second row. And then I'm just going to change the names here. And these are going to be scenes C and D. Normally you would want some better names for your methods and variables, but once again we are doing things, or we're trying to do things a bit quick. So our root is setting up the back end. Setting up the first row, and then setting up first scene, top left. Second scene is going to be top right. And for some reason we have 4 of these here we don't need. This is the second row. This is going to be the third scene, bottom left. And the fourth scene, bottom right. So now we're just going to take a short pause and see where we are going, and actually fix a few spelling mistakes as well. There we go. So as you mentioned earlier, this is going to be a circle moving around with WASD. These are the buttons to move around, and then there's some animation going on at the bottom fourth. As I promised at the beginning of this session, is that we're going to actually be talking about some of the logic in order to keep the logic separate from the code. So let's keep this circle, use it as to represent our character that we may have on screen, and then we're going to be moving him around, him or her. So we're going to jump into the logic for a bit. Now this is not going to be quite complicated. It's actually going to be fairly straightforward. We're going to have our player class, and then all they may have is, so this is the circle representing our player. Once again, circle is a class given to us by JavaFX. When we initialize it using this 3-value constructor, we're giving it the x coordinate, the y coordinate, and the width, or rather the radius of the circle. Going to be the getCircle method. And now we'll have some methods to move the the circle around. Let's say move up. And then when we talk about these kind of screens, the top left of the screen is the coordinate 0, 0. So anytime you're moving up, your y coordinate decreases. If you move down, your y coordinate increases. If you're moving left, your x coordinate decreases. If you move right, the x coordinate increases. And the x and y coordinates are given to us by the center x and center y methods. That's built into the circle class. So I'm just going to copy this 3 more times because it's going to be slight changes each time. There's move up and move down, which we change the shift from -1 to +1. Move left, and instead of changing the y coordinate, now we're changing the x coordinate. And moving right is, again, we're changing the x coordinate by +1. Now, sometimes you may say that, oh, that's a bit too slow for your movement. You can just play around with these numbers to find something that's more meaningful. Yeah, so we have our player class. We can have our, let's say, our game class. I'm not actually going to write a whole game here. All I'm going to say is the game class has a player. And we have the method getPlayer. So logically, if you're considering your own projects, what you could do is this could be the logic component of your own project, and obviously you would have more methods here. And depending on what you need to do, you would be calling the appropriate methods on the appropriate event listeners, or rather event handlers in this case. This is our very simple logic. Now we can jump back to our scenes here. And as we said, in our second scene, the top left, rather, in scene A, because we don't want to mix up second scene and scene A. In scene A, we're going to have our character there. All right, so let's create scene A here. That would be, and I'm going to pull up my cheat sheet right here, which I've done in the past. And then node scene A. And now here we're actually going to need access to the game itself. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a group, new group. Call this one root. And or rather, we don't even need access to the whole game. Essentially, we just need access to the player. So why have access to the whole game when we just need the player itself? Because we need the circle from the player and we need to move it around. Okay. Once we have that, we can just return the root as is. And when we call this, we're going to need the access to the game as well, so we're going to initialize the game. A mutilated donkey. Welcome. It's a very interesting name you have there. First of all, initialize our player. Nothing fancy there. And then initializing the game, nothing fancy there either. Let's see. So we need to import node from JavaFX, and then the player and game classes, the ones that we just created. Now, if we were to launch this, we haven't done things yet, so I'm going to comment out these lines just so the errors go away. We start. Well, we haven't done anything with the start button yet, so let's get that up and running as well, just so that we can see. But before we do that, what we can actually do is, instead of setting up the first scene, why don't we just set up the second scene? So this prevents us from having to set up the button handler quite yet, so that we can just see that the screen is coming up properly. And then once we've done all that, we're going to need to call the display method, if I recall correctly. And then we need to set up the scene method as well. Let's see, where to go? Instead of calling it pane, we called it root this time. And right now what we see here, is that something on my screen, or that's, yep, that was just on my screen. So we don't see or you can see very lightly, I think there is a dot right here. I'm not sure if that's a speck of dirt on my screen, or if that just that's actually what we want to see. So I'm going to try to make this circle a bit bigger, and that should have gotten bigger, which it hasn't, so that means we haven't done something correctly yet. Now let's see, have we added the first row to our root yet? Which I don't think we have done so far. So let's there we go. We see a black dot here that we wanted to see. Not moving yet because we haven't had the button handler yet, or the key handler, but at least it's on the screen and it's quite visible. Never seen this dot in Java before. Which dot are we talking about? While we discuss that, I'll try to get the dot centered again. I think it was just set alignment pos.center, and same thing for root here. Oh, this one does not have alignment. There we go. At least it's centered on the y coordinate. Yeah, that's the y coordinate, because recall we're only going towards halfway on the screen. And then and I think I just need to first row dot set alignment. There we go. Now it's completely centered. It's at the center of the screen because we haven't put any of the other panels in yet. Okay, now let's go back and get rid of this. Get back our first scene set up, and we will get the button working for the start button. So let's create another handler. So that would be button start handler. Now I'm going to copy a lot from my quit handler. Essentially, the starting part is quite similar. And then I'm going to look at my cheat sheet right here. We are going to need access to the session 3 object here. Or I'm not sure if we will. Take that off for now, and I'll just actually do this here. Essentially what this is supposed to do is it's supposed to set up the second scene. And once again, now we just realized we do need access to the session here because that's one of the arguments for the constructor. Now the scene is going to call the setup method. So session 3 public button start handler. Import the correct classes, Control-Shift-O. Now this is going to do is create the second scene and set it up. Essentially calling the setup method in there. And now we go back to our first scene. We're going to have to attach the event handler. So that would be button start handler. Let's call this B handler, or not B handler, S handler for start. And we needed to give access to the session here. We don't have direct access, so we call the get session method in our parent class. So click play and we click start. We have our second session here, or rather the second screen here. Next thing we wanted to do was actually get the dot moving on screen based on our key input. So once again, this would be another handler. So this is essentially a key handler. And let's see, call this player movement handler. Let's see, player movement handler is right here. Implements the event handler. And we have the key event. And we're going to get event, key event, add the unimplemented methods. And recall, we are going to need access to the player object here. So because the player is what we're moving on screen. So again, we're going to need a constructor. Key event from JavaFX, player from our logic one. Now this is going to happen, or this method is going to get executed when we have some kind of key press. So what we can do is, well, first of all, give it a better name. Key event, let's just call this key. This is going to give us a key code, meaning which key is being pressed. And we can have different cases for different situations. So if the W key is pressed, we say player.move up. And what we can also do is we can actually specify what keys are being pressed. and player.move down if S is pressed. Break. A would be player.move left. Again, break. And it's part of the reason why I don't like switch statements. I prefer if statements because we don't need to break every few lines. Move right. Break. Now just for some documentation, so W means up, S means down, A means left, and B means right. This is fairly straightforward. Now we need to connect this handler class, the player movement handler, back to our scene. So this is where the information is going to be taking in, and this is where we're going to be showing everything. So we're going to actually connect this screen to our root. Attach the player movement handler. I'm going to call this PM handler. And I realize I'm going to have to bring this up here as well. Now I could have done this below, but I do like to keep my code organized and straightforward. Then once we've created this handler, let's go back to the cheat sheet. See this variable here. I don't think we need to connect it to the root. We actually need to connect it to the scene. My apologies. What we're going to do is actually create the scene object. $600, $500. Then instead of creating a new scene here, we just pass in the one that we just created. And then we would do set on key pressed PM handler. Okay, so we've connected our player movement handler to the scene, and the scene has already been displaying as we saw earlier. Let's try testing this out. We don't see the button moving, or we don't see the circle moving. However, we do see the output just down here. And the weird thing is the character is actually moving. We just don't see it because the screen is always centered towards the character. Now, just to make things easier for us, what we can do is we can create a new line object. We have the new line object. And what that would do is focus as a reference point for us, so that we can see the circle actually moving. So it starts off at 0, 0, and it's going to end up at let's just say 5, 5. And were to do this, start, and we can see character actually moving onto the screen based on the keys we press. And if it's moving too slow, we can make him faster by just changing the offset from 1 to something else. Here to player class, instead of saying 1, it goes. Let's say it moves up by 4. And now it's moving a lot faster. All right, and now we're down and we're a little over halfway done, luckily. We need to get the other 3 scenes going, the scenes B, C, and D, but luckily they're fairly straightforward. Let's go back to our second scene right here. And I'm going to, again, look at my cheat sheet. Scene B. And I think it's going to need access to the player again because we're going to have 4 buttons that are going to allow us to actually move the player. We have an actual question. Is the dot able to move on the sides of the screen? Is the dot able to move? Let's take a look. Just halt this method and restart our program. We just keep moving. Eventually it goes off screen. Now I'm just waiting for it to come back. Eventually it does come back. So it's kind of like you can see the camera is in the middle, and now these 2 things are kind of moving forward. Now keep in mind this line is not moving at all. So it's like the camera is shifting and zooming in, is shifting as along with the camera. Along with our character here. But the dot is able to move off screen. One thing that we can do to prevent it from doing that is make sure where the current X and Y coordinates are, they don't go beyond a certain point. And what that point is would depend on the actual project, like where you actually set up your boundaries. Okay, so now we have scene B. Now this is going to be 4 vertically aligned buttons. So button, up, button, import, down, left, now since we want them vertically aligned, we can just do a V-box. Instead of adding 1 at a time, we can add all 4 by giving them the list of the arguments we have, and then setting the alignment, add position.center, return box. Instead of get alignment, it should be set alignment. Minor fix, and let's just see if this actually puts up those boxes that we wanted to see. And it doesn't do that yet because we let's see, where did it go? Here we go. Because we had commented out this line. And here we go, we have the 4 buttons, up, down, left, right. Right now we don't have the event handlers yet, so they don't do anything. But we can do that as well. And then we can also do the first row is aligned properly. I think we'll come back to the alignments later. They're not as necessary. I think these are things that you can just play around. The functionality is the important part right here. Okay. So once again, new handlers. And a new class. Button movement handler. Now for all 4 buttons, we are going to do a single handler instead of doing 4 different handlers here. And I'll show you how that's done. Again, I'm going to copy a bunch of code from here just so I don't have to type it over and over again. Okay, let's see. Oh, and that's the error I'm getting is because I don't have a space here. And if I import the right classes, now as I mentioned, we need access to the player class again. Then we create a constructor. Import the right classes, and this is going to be a bit different here. So this is here we go. This is the action event. And then what we can do is, since we know that the event is going to be of a type button, we can cast it back into a button class. We know what kind of button it's going to be. Event.getSource. If we know what kind of button it's going to be, we can actually do the correct action. So if you recall, we had the 4 buttons, each with a different text. So we can actually compare the text. If we press up, the character moves up. If it's down, then player moves down. And then the other 2. Player moving left, and finally source get text dot contains right. Then this would be player dot move right. Okay, so let's try this out now. And start it, and it's not doing anything yet. And once again, that's because we jumped the gun here, and then we need to actually go back here and attach the event listener, event handler to these buttons. Initialize the buttons. Okay, so this would be a btn movement handler. I'm going to copy this, and just do this right here. Make sure we have the correct classes imported, and then we set up the VBox. If we run this, we should be able to move now. Now, as we see, if you press up button, it moves up. If you press down, it's moving down. If you press left, it's moving left. If you press right, it moves right. Once again, keep in mind the logic code, the handler code, and the view code. It's all separated into different classes and different packages. In the GUI package, we have the second scene class. This is where all the display is being taken care of. In the handlers package, this is where we have our button handlers, action handlers, event handlers. They're the one who get information from that's interaction that's being done on the screen, and then they update the actual logic, and the logic is actually taking care of the player's position. Okay. So now let's see. Scene C. Let's just kind of copy scene A here, and then just make slight differences because we don't actually need the player. All we will have here is a simple line here, nothing special. Let's see. Simple line. We're not adding any animation here, but I will show you the animation here in scene D, which should be very straightforward. But in order to do that, we're going to need an instance variable here. Now, once again, we can be getting this instance variable from our logic component, but just to speed things up, we're getting it from, we're just going to create it here. And what we're going to do is in scene D, once again, I'm going to take a look at my cheat sheet. It's going to be, scene D is going to be again straightforward with no input. It's going to be independent from the player. What we're going to do is create, so I'm going to get rid of all this. I'm going to create an HBox. Then I'm going to create a button and spell it properly. We're going to say that the counter is going to start off at 0. And then I'm going to just add this button to my box. Whoops. Get children dot add the button here. Let's see what else. And hbox dot set alignment. Or it's just called box here. To the center. But before we return the box as is, we're going to actually initialize a animation timer. And this is an example of a nested class. Now, once again, you can have this as a separate class, depending on how big it's going to be. But we're going to have a handle method. And we're going to take our button that we just declared up here. We're going to set the text to the counter is going to be that counter variable that we declared above. And we're going to increment it. We're going to increment it here. And then if we say if the counter has reached 1000, reset it back to 0. Otherwise, that number just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And let's see what is this doing here. Then once we've done all that, going to be a dot start at the bottom. Import the right classes, and supposed to be an override here. And why does it not like my access to the counter variable? Counter variable cannot be resolved. What did we call it up here? Oh, we just called it count. Let's call it counter. So these errors have gone. I think we have everything set up properly. Do we have the nodes and the scenes? Yep, these lines are uncommented. So let's start. Here we can start. And I think that's because we haven't added actually the second row to the root. It would be root dot get children dot add the second row. Patience is important. Just trying to run the code without having completed the code itself can get frustrated and time consuming. All right, so we have our buttons moving. We have able to move the character using these buttons. This alignment here seems a bit off, but we can see that the counter number, it's continuously going up. And then once it gets to 1,000, it'll come back down to 0. So let's fix this weird alignment here. And we have a question, will you upload this code and the passcode somewhere? I could. Probably on D2L, and then some way to get it to the CPSC 219 students as well. But the important part is to actually be at the session to understand the code, because I don't think people would be able to understand the code without actually seeing what's going on and why it was created in such a way. But I'll do my best to actually put up this code somewhere online so that everyone has access to it. Okay, now where were we? Second row, adding the children. Root is going to add the second row. Now the odd part is, why is it not aligning things properly? And I think that's because I have not set the, or have I set the preferred height and width of the second column, or the second row rather, 250 by 600. Let's see. Per height is supposed to be half of this value. This is 500 value. So this is supposed to be width 300. The height is 500. So that's what I have on my code here. Oh, I think I know why. This is actually supposed to be 300, not 600. But it's the, I think it's the height of each panel as compared to the height of okay. Getting a bit closer. Okay, let's see. What did I do here in my previous one? The height and width were half of the height and width of the whole screen, so which is what I have right here, 250, 300, and 250 and 300, where the whole screen is 600 by 500. Now I realize I'm probably missing an alignment statement somewhere. This is second row, set preferable columns to 2, set the height, set the width, and then okay, Alright, if we set alignment here, the second row, now we see something a bit more that's better, because it is centered quite correctly. Then the thing all I might need to do is, let's see, yeah, this box is centered also correctly, and each row is centered properly, and then I believe the root itself is centered. Alignment is centered to the center. Okay, let's see what else we want to do. One thing we can do is, if we can see here, when we actually run it, all these buttons are of different size. This sometimes gets annoying if you want to have a nice visual, so we can actually change the button sizes as well to have it something default. And in order to do that, we can do it in different ways. One is we can actually create a configuration file. And essentially this would be a public static final button height and a button width. And let's see, what was the button height and width that I've set up in my so the height was 20 and the width was 70. Oh, forgot to specify the type, int. Now when we actually create our buttons, let's go back to the second scene. When we create our 4 buttons, we can do up dot size, and then this would be button config dot button width and button height. And we can actually copy this for the rest. So if we were to do, if we've done this correctly, all these buttons are all the same size. Now, another way to do this is instead of actually creating a file like this, or rather a class like this, you can save it into a text file, create a configuration file, and then just read those values using file IO. All right. And to be honest, I'm not sure why it's not showing these 4 panels that nicely. I think these ones should be, they're all centered towards, these ones are centered towards their right, and these ones are centered towards their left. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Just to show it from my example, what I had initially was something very smaller, but something like this. So this was centered quite nicely. And you can see, we can again move. It's a lot smaller, but it's essentially the same thing. This is the example that I was working off of. All right. Is there anything else somebody would like, anyone would like me to cover? Or was this a good enough tutorial for JavaFX, at least to help you get started? Or if, hopefully you've already gotten started with your project and you have a GUI up and running, but maybe you needed some extra help on how to separate your code from the GUI and logic, how to use different packages, how do you actually attach event handlers to the actual the GUI component and then have it change the logic component. I'll wait a few more seconds for if there are any questions. Then this was very helpful. Thanks for the live coding. I missed it. Well, you're welcome. And it makes a lot more sense now. And then Dogefish, thank you so much. And then once again, you're welcome. Thank you for attending. If there are any questions, even now or later, please let me know. I agree. Live coding sessions are a lot more helpful than actually, a pre-designed code where I would have just gone through and then explained each block of code, and we would have been done in about half an hour, 45 minutes. But a lot of the details would have gone missing. You wouldn't have seen me struggle and figure out what I needed to do. Now, hopefully, seeing me make those mistakes, you won't make those mistakes yourself. And those mistakes weren't staged. That this was actually me coding live while looking at something else that I had done in the past. So I tried to remember as much as I could, but mistakes happen. So we have IRF Loon. We missed most of the stream, and that's why you're asking for the upload. I'll do my best to do the upload. I'll talk to the course instructors, and if they say it's okay, then I'll upload the code. But one thing I want to emphasize is just because you can read the code does not necessarily mean that you would be able to understand content. So the important part is actually understanding the content. IRF Loon is from 219. Okay, I will talk to the instructor of 219, and hopefully they will allow me to upload code, or they can upload the code on my behalf. If anything, you can always send me an email either through Twitter or through here or through my Ucality account, and then I can send you the code privately as well. That also works. Then I don't see. I think this was very helpful. It was uploaded just to reference it later. Okay. So I hear that there's a lot of demand for me to upload the code. Once again, I'll talk to the instructors. If they say it's okay, I'll upload. Otherwise, if you want to send me an email, I can send it to you privately. All right. That is the end of the questions. Once again, thank you very much for attending. I had a great time. Hope you all had a great time too. I'm sorry if it didn't go as smoothly as you wanted, but I think that seeing those mistakes would have been helpful for you, so that you don't make the same mistakes I do. Or if you do make the same mistakes I did, then you hopefully have a way to correct them. So you saw how I corrected those mistakes, or at least most of them. I didn't have the time to actually get the panels aligned at the very end there. But yeah, we saw screen switching, we saw different packages, we saw key listeners, or key handlers. Sorry, I'm so used to the Swing library that that's why I use the word listeners as compared to handlers. JavaFX uses handlers. So yeah, we saw event handlers, then key event handlers, action event handlers, button clicks. Live drawing. We saw animation where something is independent of the actual events. It's just happening in an infinite loop. And yeah, hopefully this session was as helpful as I think. Other than that, thank you for coming. Hope you had a good time. I'll see you folks next time. Which reminds me, the next session is going to be this Friday. I think I have it right here. So yeah, this video will be posted on the YouTube channel later tonight. The next session is going to be on Friday at 7 p.m. again on this channel. There we will be covering file I/O and exception handling. Won't go into that much detail, but at least get the basics of being able to read and write to files and being able to do exception handling. This is going to be the next session. All right, good. This time I actually remembered to make this announcement. All right, well, thank you all for coming, and have yourselves a good night.